Good evening. My name is Philip, and it's a great privilege to be here this evening speaking to you on the topic of justice. The Bible speaks enthusiastically about justice and emphatically affirms the call to do justice and right injustice. But the Bible does not offer abstract definitions of justice or some grand theory, but instead the Bible reveals a God who is passionate about justice, a God who gives his chosen people laws that protect and promote the welfare of the poor, the weak, the oppressed. A God who demands that rulers and governors in authority do right and execute justice. A God who ultimately reveals his heart of justice on the cross. We read in the Bible, "Follow justice and justice alone, so that you may live and possess the land the Lord your God is giving you." Deuteronomy 16:20. "For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and wrongdoing." Isaiah 61:8. "For the Lord loves justice." Psalm 37:28. There is absolutely no theme in the Bible as central and significant for right relationship as tzedek, the Hebrew word for justice. It means fidelity or faithfulness to the demands of relationship. It refers to the day-to-day living of a person's conduct in all his relationships, family and society. Conduct that is marked by fairness, generosity, and equity. The other word that is used in the Hebrew Bible for justice is mishpat. It occurs in its various forms over 200 times in the Old Testament. It means corrective justice. It's about acquitting or punishing every person according to the merits of the case, regardless of race or social status. So one is about primary justice, about right living in relationships, and the other is about the consequences of what you do when that tzedek is broken down. There is mishpat, or bringing judgment. But here is the problem. Christians are not known as the people who love justice and do justice. Some Christians even question the notion that doing justice is biblical. Some have the misunderstanding that the God of the Old Testament is the God of justice, and the God of the New Testament is the God of love. The Old Testament is about judgment, and the New Testament is about forgiveness. And I want to challenge that idea head on. Part of the problem here is the English language. We have translated the Greek word, and I'm going to struggle here now to say this. Anyone who knows Greek might correct me. Dikaiosina. That's the Greek word that is used in the manuscripts for justice. But in the English Bible, we have translated that word into righteousness from the German word recht. But if you read the Bible in some of the Romance languages like Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, or Romanian, you will often come across the word justice in the Latin justitia. Part of the problem with this word righteousness is that it is now only used as a religious word and has come to mean being right with God in your inner self, not about being faithful to the demands of relationship and about the right ordering of society. It has come to mean matters of the heart, not matters of society. So if we were being true to what the manuscript said in the Greek, so for example, if you read Plato's Republic, which I recommend everyone to read, I'm just kidding, all the words that are in Plato's Republic in classical Greek that have dike derivative words stemming from dike is translated into just, justice, judgment. Then why have we translated dike words in the Greek manuscripts into righteous and righteousness? And I've never had a proper answer to somebody why, particularly in the English Bible, when the King James Bible was being produced. I suppose it was difficult to put the word justice in the New Testament when the king was asking you to produce a Bible. But let's read Matthew 6:33, for example. "But seek first his kingdom, and the word that is used following is his justice, and all these things will be added to you." Or Matthew 5:6, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." I made a mistake myself. "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they shall be filled." Go and check it out. Ask your pastor or ask somebody who knows New Testament Greek that the word is actually justice. But if that doesn't convince you, of course, the passage that we read for the New Testament reading was the words of Jesus, where he announces his kingdom. It's like a leader proclaiming his manifesto with these words: "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Luke 4, 18 and 19. So if anybody tells you that justice doesn't matter or it is unimportant to God, be sure that it's not biblical. It cannot be. Because if you read the Bible, we encounter a God who cares deeply about the poor, the weak, the vulnerable. Justice is like the golden thread that runs throughout the entire Bible, from the Old Testament to the New Testament, from Genesis 1 to Revelation 22. What I want us to do is to look at one particular book in the Bible that I think best captures or summarizes what justice is. And that's the book of Amos. Has anyone here read the book of Amos? A few of you. If you have a chance today and maybe this week, do read the book of Amos. There's 9 chapters there. And it's a book that, of course, there's a lot of this verses about judgment, but actually gives you something of the heart of God for justice. So Amos, the story happens around 750 BC during the reign of King Jeroboam II. He was an ordinary man. In fact, one of the verses, it mentions that he says, I'm not the son of a prophet or belonging to a school of prophets, because many of these prophets who were part of the school of prophets were professionals who were saying what the king wanted to hear. Amos actually says, I'm not part of that. In fact, I had 2 jobs. I was looking after sheep as well as I was, a farmer. And God calls this man from a place called Tekoa in the south of Jerusalem, from some rural place, and says to him, go to Judah, go to Israel. He was from Judah, the southern kingdom, and go to Israel and speak to them my prophecy. And one of the prophets there tells the king, tell this guy to go back to where he came from. This is the story of Amos. But the thing that strikes me about Amos's life that I think is so important is, in the end, doing justice is not about primarily, I think, about helping some people out there. It's about being obedient to God. Amos had a deep sense of the call of God in his life. He was a man who spoke truth and acted courageously. So this is what was happening in Israel at that time. It was a time of relative peace in Israel, and there was great prosperity in the land. The Assyrian Empire was actually in turmoil, and they were not threatening Israel. The temples were filled with people. There were lots of people going to the temple, and the nation had a sort of religious awakening. Wealth and power were concentrated in the hands of the few. And the people in positions of authority were letting down the poor. And God sends Amos to bring a message. And you read some of the injustices in the land of Israel at this time. I'll read you some of them. People are being sold into slavery because of small debts. Poor people's labor was being exploited. Trade was dishonest. There was sexual immorality in the land. Often immorality and injustice go together. Father and son were sleeping with the same woman. And there was abuse of women. And then we read in Amos 5, 7, 21 and 24, the passage that we had read before about God's anger at the kind of religion that also went along with injustice. I'm going to read it from the message here. I can't stand your religious meetings. I'm fed up with your conferences and conventions. I want nothing to do with your religious projects and your pretentious slogans. I'm sick of your fundraising schemes and your public relations. I've had all I can take of your noisy music. When was the last time you really sang to me? Do you know what I want? I want justice. Oceans of it. I want fairness. Rivers of it. That's what I want. That's all I want. The great paradox in the book of Amos is that the very religious people who believed that they were doing what was pleasing to God also practiced great injustice. Their worship and singing was just noise, because it was only external and it didn't come from the heart. The veneer of religiosity was being used as a fig leaf to cover up injustice. And then, of course, if we read Amos chapter 3, God talks about what he's going to do to them. And so, you cannot escape from the fact that God is the God of justice. Now, here's the question. Why is there so much injustice in the world? I struggle with that question very deeply. Why doesn't God do something about it? And I think you have to also grapple with this question. If you want to be a person of justice, you've got to grapple with this question at almost at a gut existential level. and encounter a God in the midst of this world who still cares about justice, and whose justice, like I said in the beginning, is revealed to us on the cross. I want to talk about 3 key points about justice from the book of Amos. Are you still with me? Yeah. Good. I want to talk about knowing the God of justice, 2, becoming a people of justice, and 3, building institutions of justice. 3 lessons from the book of Amos and the Bible in general. First, knowing the God of justice. Knowing God and doing justice is intimately bound up together. Right relationship with God and right relationship with your neighbor cannot be separated. In fact, in the Bible we read, worshipping false gods and idols inevitably leads to injustice. Those who worship mammon will not hesitate to trample the poor under their feet. And equally true, those who worship the God of the Bible serve the poor. So I want to make 3 points about knowing the God of justice. And how am I doing for time, Tim?
You're fine.
Good. Thank you.
I
I will try to unpack this as quickly as I can, and I do want to tell some personal stories as well. This is not just intellectual stuff. It's the journey that I've walked with God, and I feel like I want to share something tonight that you can go away both challenged but also encouraged that God is at work in our world and that you can play a part in what He's doing. 3 things about knowing the God of justice that I'm going to unpack, okay? So, and then I'll stop for a second and tell you maybe a story. Usually helps. Knowing the God of justice. One of the first things about knowing the God of justice is coming to terms with the fact that God cannot be domesticated into a tribal deity. Unlike the gods of the Romans and the Indians, the God of justice will not lend His support or give credence to any scheme or project that serves the cause of injustice. God cannot be manipulated or mocked. He holds every person, rich and powerful, and the weak and vulnerable, equally accountable for their actions and behavior. There's something about the God of justice that He does. He's not the God just for the Indians or the God just for the English. God forbid. He is the God of all flesh. This is very important to understand. Therefore, for us, we care about everybody. We don't just think about ourselves or our group. God, and yet at the same time, because God loves everybody, God also has a special place in His heart for the poor and vulnerable. In the Old Testament, we repeatedly hear God's concern for the well-being of the widows, the immigrants, and the orphans, people who could be easily exploited by the powerful. Plato's Republic again. Plato's Republic is all about justice. But nowhere in the Republic is justice connected with caring for the weak, the poor, and the oppressed. There is no ancient literature that you can go to where justice is connected to caring for the poor, the weak, and the oppressed. Only Yahweh, this strange, extraordinary, mighty God, the God of the Hebrew people who delivered them out of slavery, reveals Himself as the God who has this special love for the poor, the weak, and the oppressed. And finally, knowing the God of justice is knowing that justice and mercy always go together. This is very important to understand tonight. I really want to say to you guys, because you're passionate about justice, you have to also equally be passionate about mercy. Because I know sometimes I've spent most of my life being involved in some sort of justice struggle. And it is so easy to make justice about retribution. And justice even becomes revenge. That the people who were once oppressed want to bring punishment of the most terrible kind on the people that oppressed them. And that is not God's justice. God's justice and God's mercy always go together. It is God's mercy for the poor that makes God act in judgment against those who commit injustice against the poor. The ultimate purpose for God's judgment is not revenge, it is restoration. God punishes us because He wants to bring us back to Him. This is always the purpose for why God disciplines us. The book of Amos, after the pronouncements of judgment, God tells terrible things He's going to do to Israel, ends with these words. The days are coming, declares the Lord. New wine will drip from the mountains and flow from all the hills. And I will bring my people Israel back from exile. They will rebuild their ruined cities and live in them. They will plant vineyards and drink their wine. They will make gardens and eat their fruit. I will plant Israel in their own land and never again uproot them from the land I've given them, says the Lord. That's how the book of Amos ends. This book that has in chapter 3 terrible judgment. God saying, I'm going to destroy the land, I'm going to destroy your houses. Ends with this promise. If mercy is not the hand that wields the sword of justice, what you will get is injustice. That was the key insight I had to learn a couple of years back. That if mercy is not the hand that wields the sword of justice, what you will get is injustice. None of us would be here if not for God's mercy in our lives. 2. The second thing I want to say is about becoming a people of justice. So knowing the God of justice, becoming a people of justice. This means personal change. It means moving away from indifference and cynicism and being willing to take some responsibility for the state of the world, starting with your local context. This is inner soul transformation, and it is only possible through the work of the Holy Spirit. That you as an individual has to go through a process of being changed. And I want to talk about 3 things that, 3 marks of a person who is a person of justice. And I want to go through this quickly. First thing about a person of justice, I believe, is that he or she is a person who speaks the truth. Becoming a person of justice means speaking the truth, even when it is difficult and it will cost you something. Often, dishonesty and falsehood goes along with injustice. Speaking the truth in the face of injustice is a revolutionary act. And I want to challenge you, don't hold back from saying things that are truthful about the state of the world. Part of doing justice is to speak the truth. Second thing, and this is where it connects to this idea of, God is the God of justice, but why is there injustice in the world? And I want to talk about something called lamenting. It's very difficult to talk. Lamenting is again one of those religious words that we read in scriptures. It's actually a whole book in the Bible called Lamentation. But lamenting is if you read some of the Psalms, you come across Psalms of lament. And I want to talk briefly about how each of you have to learn to lament before God in this journey of justice, of doing justice. Lament is the persistent call or cry for God's salvation to come quickly. It is reminding God of His promises to save while feeling trapped in situations of sin and suffering. It is expressing hope that God hears and will respond to our cries. Lament calls upon God to be true to God's own character and to keep God's own promise with respect to humanity and the created world. Lament prayers are prayers from a place of social dislocation and spiritual disorientation. It is making raw pleas to God to rise up and act against the wicked and bring justice to the oppressed. It is expressing trust in God in the face of a helpless and hopeless situation. There is much in our world that makes us feel hopeless. And it's easy to forget about what's going on in the world. And I think for some of you, it's probably the right thing to do because you've got to focus on studying and finishing your degree. But in the long-term journey of your life, in the next 10 years or 20 years, commit yourself to becoming a person who brings these sort of pleas before God. I don't know what issue God might awaken in your heart to care about. Women being trafficked, or children being exploited, or something else. Naomi was asking me earlier, what is that injustice issue that really affects you, that keeps you awake at night and makes you feel angry? And I was telling her a couple of things that really affect me and challenge me. Finally, becoming a person of justice is about acting with courage. The Bible commands us to do justice, not just think about justice or pray for justice. It's about acting with courage. I just want to read a quote from Nelson Mandela. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. And of course, there are going to be times when you would feel it's okay to just be indifferent. But I pray that God will give you the courage to act, to do something. And finally, I want to talk about building institutions of justice. What I think I'm going to do is very quickly touch upon the 3 points that I have there. That building institutions of justice is not something that happens overnight. Doing justice is not just sort of praying for a miracle. Of course, we want to pray for miracles. It's a long-term marathon. It's something that you think about not only in your lifetime, but over generations. That's how I've come to think about justice. I'm not going to see all the justice that I'm praying for in my lifetime. But I want to play a role right now in my life, whether I live for one day or for another 10 years of my life, that my life will leave some sort of legacy for the sake of God's justice in the world. That's the commitment I think God is calling you to make. Simple acts of obedience in small places can change the world. I hope some of you become the Prime Minister of this country or something great like that, but oftentimes it's obeying God in those little things, in those small places that change the world. So the first thing about building institutions, it's one thing to be against apartheid in South Africa, and it's another thing to build a free democratic society based on justice for the sake of the common good. So it's not just about being against evil, but about participating in bringing about good. And three things in that: public and secular, not merely Christian. What do I mean? Building public institutions of justice is not about serving the narrow religious interests of Christians. So here's an example. It's not just about fighting to protect Christians from persecution, but about wanting all minorities in society to be protected from the ill treatment of the state. You see what I mean? So Christians go into the world and serve the world not because it's going to be something that is good for us and the church. We do it because God loves the world, including the sinful world that is against Him. But Teresa, when she served the poor in Calcutta, she wasn't just trying to look after Christian babies that were being thrown away. Second thing that I think is very important when you think about engaging institutions is to keep in mind is that in the struggle against injustice, you will encounter social and political forces that are spiritually opposed to God's righteous ordering of society. Without fasting and prayer, you cannot engage or overcome these powers. There's something, it's just not injustice, there's a spiritual power behind injustice that opposes God's redemption of the world. And this is why prayer and your own sort of walk with God makes such a big difference in this journey of wanting to be a person who does justice. Are you with me? Good. I'm going to say one last thing and then I'm going to tell a story. Finally, justice as right relationships. And the Jubilee Center has been for many years promoting this message that right relationship is not just interpersonal but also institutional. So, for example, what is the right relationship between management and workers? Between people who have capital and people who have labor? What is a fair ratio in terms of pay differentials? Some people think it's 1 to 10. So if the CEO of the company salary is £10,000 a year, the person who's at the checkout desk at Tesco earns £1,000 a year. That kind of ratio. At the moment in our world, some of the pay differentials are like 1 to 500. What are you going to do about it? What does God think about that? So when we think about right relationship, it's just not about right relationship between husband and wife or parents and children. It's also about right relationship in society. What does right relationship look like between nations? God loves this world. And that's the basis on which I'm saying what I'm saying to you today. So finally, I'm going to tell a story, okay? Because you've been waiting for this. Okay, let's go to the last, there's a photo there, if I can have that up. Okay, I'm going to finish with this. I was in New York. Can you still hear me? I was in New York in 2007. At that point, doing some bit of advocacy and lobbying work in the UN. And I enjoyed that sort of work because I studied politics, I've got a background in international relations, and we were there for some meetings on the Commission for Social Development, and the focus of that commission for that year was unemployment. So I was in the meetings all day, meeting diplomats and meeting all these sort of NGO people, trying to network and trying to sort of say something that you think God wants you to say at these meetings. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and it was so cold. This was January in New York, and if anyone has been to Manhattan in January, you know how cold it is. I was really hungry. I was so hungry, and I was staying just at the YMCA near the UN, and with a Nigerian friend of mine who I had gone to the UN with. And he was fast asleep, and I was so hungry. So I decided I'm going to go to McDonald's. What else do you do, At that point, I hadn't met Tim yet. Wouldn't do it now, So I walked down the street I was staying and then took a left because I knew there was a McDonald's there on Lexington Avenue, which is near Grand Central Station. And just as I was getting up the steps to go into McDonald's, I hear this. It was totally dark. The only light was inside McDonald's. It was dark on the right and the left. I didn't realize there was a man sitting there on the steps, and he just said, I'm hungry. Can you help me? I kind of heard him and I still went into the McDonald's, and I was standing there to get my McDonald's. It was empty. I thought I'd get a Big Mac. And then something in me felt like I should go back and speak to him. So I came out, opened the glass door, came out, and I said to him, excuse me, can I buy you some food? He said, I would really appreciate that. He was an African-American man. And so I said, let's go and have food together. Come, I want to get you something to eat. And he was slightly, I think, shocked that I had suggested that idea, but because he wanted to eat, he decided he'd come up the steps of the McDonald's, but then didn't want to come inside. So I said to him, I want to eat dinner tonight with you at McDonald's. So let's go inside and eat together. So he's not even willing to open the glass door and step in. So literally, I'm like telling him, no, come with me. You're like, I'm taking you inside. So finally, he opens the door, steps in, and he doesn't want to go any further. Then I realized what was going on. He didn't want to go into McDonald's because if he was seen inside McDonald's, customers don't come in. And the guys don't let him sit by McDonald's and beg. So he would lose his sort of income because they'd chase him away from there. So finally I decided that I'm going to get him dinner. So I bought him a pack of bought 2 McDonald's, Big Macs, and decided I'm going to go and sit with him outside and eat. So we go to the steps where he was sitting, and it is freezing cold. I don't even know how he managed to sit there all night. We start eating together, and I could sort of sit next to him, and the smell of this homeless man who hadn't probably been inside a shower, or even inside a house for I don't know how long. We ate dinner together. I was talking to him, trying to find out. He'd been living on the street for about 7 years at this point. After 9/11, he sort of went, he had some mental health issues, had never been back home. He hasn't seen his family in 7 years. So we have dinner together, and then he sort of very helpfully takes all that paper and puts it in the bin, and I'm still trying to tell him about myself. I came from India and all of that. And then, just as I was saying goodbye to him and saying, I hope I just was trying to say something, I hope life gets better for you. I don't know what to say to him. At which point, he looks at me and says something that I completely didn't expect. He said to me, can I have a hug? Now at this point, all my, the wall inside me goes up. I'm like, what if he just takes the knife and stabs me, and then robs me? All these thoughts are going through my head. I'm thinking no, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't hug this man. And he's got these sort of layers of clothes on him. But somehow I felt in that moment that my giving him food was not the real gift. The gift was to hug him. And I decided to give him a hug. And I hugged him. At which point, he almost started crying. And I then had to tell him why I even stopped to talk to him and wanted to buy him dinner. And I said that's because I met Jesus one day in my life and he changed me. And that's why it's possible for me to, at 1 o'clock at night on Lexington Avenue, sitting on the side of the street and have a meal with you. And he said something about how he once was a Christian, he knew something about God, and finally I said, can I pray for you? And he said, sure. What do you pray for that person at that point? I don't know. I just prayed whatever I felt like God put in my heart, and I said goodbye to him. I gave him another hug, and then walked away going well, back to sleep and back to UN meetings tomorrow morning. I never see that guy again till 2009. One day I'm again walking down Lexington Street. I've been back to Manhattan many times between 2007 and 2009. I never see him again. Finally I meet him again. And he remembered me. His name was Johnny. This photo was taken the third time actually. But this was the second time I met him in 2009. And God had changed his life. He wasn't living on the streets anymore. He was not eating food out of dumpsters. He was living in a homeless shelter. He had started going to a church, the same church that Martin Luther King used to go to, and started helping homeless people. And we went to that same McDonald's again, and this time we sat inside and ate. It was the most wonderful experience meeting this homeless man again, Mr. Johnny, I used to call him, and he called me Mr. Philip. Say goodbye to him. I don't see him again. I don't go back to New York after 2009 for 4 years. I'm back in America in 2013. And I go back to the UN for some work, and I want to find this guy. I spend 2 hours walking around, over an hour, walking around slightly wanted to exaggerate the story, and I felt convicted. Over an hour. It was not 2 hours. Walking around Grand Central Station between those streets trying to find this guy, because I'm like, I hope he's still alive. I don't know what's happened to him. And finally, he's standing outside this coffee shop, opening doors for people, and I meet him. And so this third time I did take a photo of him together. Mr. Johnny, he just said, Mr. Philip. This was 4 years later. And it was the most incredible moment. We were hugging each other. We were like brothers who hadn't seen each other. Then the guy who was running the coffee shop was so excited by the story, he decided to give both of us coffee for free. And this man told me the most incredible story I'd ever heard. We're sitting and having coffee together, talking about life and what's been happening. Things have changed in my life. He looks at me and says, oh, you know, because I told him, he said, what were you doing in America? I said, I came to America, this was 2013, okay? I'm going to finish. This was 2013. I said I was here in America because I wanted to go to Obama's second inauguration in Washington. I just felt I should be there, in the crowd, of course. Thousands of people there in the mall in Washington. And I just felt I should be there because I felt I should sort of support my president. And I say this to him, and this guy, Mr. Johnny, looks at me and says, oh, you know, I met Obama. And I looked at him and I went like, which Obama, you know? He said, the President Obama. When? Last year. No way. How did that happen? He goes, you know, there's this church near the UN called St. Bartholomew's, where there's a hotel where the US president stays. I know this place very well. Not the hotel, but that street. And the president and his all of them were staying there. And about like 9 o'clock one night, President Obama decides he wants to play basketball. And one of the things they do is they play basketball in this church next to this hotel, where all these homeless guys hang out. So all of a sudden at 9 o'clock in the evenings, Secret Service shows up there and wants to clear all these homeless people, because if you go online and type in that church, you'll see a photo of Obama playing basketball there. I've actually walked past that basketball court just to make sure the story is true. And Obama came in and said, no, they can hang out. He played basketball for half an hour, and then he stopped and talked with these guys for almost 15 minutes that were there. And he said, I met him. He shook my hand. He was very kind to me, and he wanted to know who I was. I was shocked. And I wish I could meet Obama one day. This guy, Mr. Johnny, just a few months earlier had met President Obama because they hang out in this basketball court near this church. And the reason I share this story is, of course, you know, there are hundreds of homeless people in New York. I can't help every one of them. The system has to work for people who are homeless. But your life can make a difference for that one person. And in fact, Mr. Johnny has done more for me than I've done for Mr. Johnny. And I want to challenge you tonight, as you think about your life, as you think about your study here at Cambridge. What is it that God wants to do through you in someone else's life? And are you willing to be open to that odd, smelly person who you think is actually kind of making life difficult for you? Not that any of you would think that. But I was struggling to hug this man that first night. Let me end with this prayer as a blessing for just love to each of you tonight. May God bless us with discomfort and easy answers, half-truths and superficial relationships, so that we may live from deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger and injustice, oppression and exploitation of people, so that we may work for justice, freedom and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer pain, rejection, hunger and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and to turn their pain into joy. May God bless us with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in this world, so that we can do what others claim cannot be done, to bring justice and mercy to all God's children and all our neighbors who are poor. Amen.